Hello beautiful friends, I'm here today with another project to share with you for the Cut To You design team. Today I am using the Rosy Posy cut file, which I have gone ahead and cut twice from some white textured cardstock. They're two slightly different sizes, one's a little bit smaller than the other, and as you can see I have already backed these with some pattern papers off camera ready to start creating. I have this photo of my family, my husband and my kids and I. This was taken in January 2019. I've got a really big box of photos that I've started actually pre-printing all of my photos when I have the time to sit down and do it. I send them out and it just helps to make my process a little bit quicker. So when I am ready to start creating, I just flip through my box of photos, pick something out, and I'm ready to go. The collection that I'm using is Cocoa Vanilla's. It's an older collection. It's the Bohemian Dream collection. I don't have a lot of this one. I've got these chipboard titles. I've got actually for some reason a couple of embellishment packs. I've got some flair, some enamel pieces, and I think maybe 6 or 7 of the 12 by 12 pattern papers. So not a huge amount, but certainly enough for me to be able to create something beautiful. So let's hop on fast forward and see this one come together. Okay, so I'm starting off as I usually do, and I am creating my background. I've got my white cardstock, which I'm trimming down to about 11 3/4 of an inch square. And then I'm going to use this really bold floral pattern as the mat for my page. If you've been with me for a little while, you will know that I almost always add a patterned paper mat to my background. And to do that, what I always do is I cut out about an inch from the outside. So I gut the center of that because I don't want to waste that paper, leaving an inch border, and then I lay my white cardstock over the top, as you're seeing me do here. Just trying to make sure that it's nice and even. I do eyeball it. I used to use a T-square ruler to try and make sure that it was nice and straight. But these days I tend to just eyeball it a little bit more just to make the process that little bit quicker. Use a tiny bit of wet adhesive around the border just to hold it down, and then in a little while I will take it over to my sewing machine and I will add some stitching around the border just for some added texture and interest. I love stitched elements on my page. So for my photo, I am adding a plain white cardstock mat to that photo. Again, this is something that I always do on all of my layouts. I know that I could leave a white border. In fact, I do leave a white border when I'm printing, but I always trim that off and add the white cardstock mat to it instead because I like the extra depth. And it's just another layer of interest that is added to my page. So I've reused that really bold floral pattern to add another really thin mat to the back of my photo. And that is all I'm going to do with the photo for now. What I'm doing is just measuring it to see how wide that is with the pattern paper mats behind it, and I'm using that as a guide to trim down these pieces of pattern paper because I have an idea of making a layer of kind of like a fringed layer going down my page. So I have chosen a few different pattern papers. Now the reason that I'm cutting the middle out of that one, as I did in the beginning with that floral paper, is because I wanted to use some of that purple patterned paper, but I think that it could be something that I would use for a whole page mat when I come to use this collection again. So to make sure that I've left myself with enough pieces of pattern paper, that's something that I tend to do, is I will cut the middle out of a pattern paper when I need to use just a smaller piece. Hopefully that made sense. So I'm trimming these down to 1.5 inches tall, and I think they are about maybe about 5.5 inches wide, I think. And I'm just making sure that I've got enough of them that it's going to run the length of the page. And I'm trying to make sure that I've got a variety of patterns and a variety of colors. So you can see I've got a couple of pops of that darker blue there, some softer purple, some of the polka dots, the white polka dots, and then some of the purple patterned paper. I just want to make sure that there's a good contrast between the patterns as they are going to be layered down my page. Then I'm pulling out this punch. This one's fairly new to me. I think it's from Dress My Craft. And I didn't make you watch me punch those. I did all of that off camera. Off camera, I have also added that row of stitching, which you can see now. So before I start sticking anything down, I am just going to play around with the placement a little bit and just roughly pop those down. What I'm trying to do here is just make sure that I have enough strips to run down the page. And I think I reach a point where I realize I don't quite have enough. So I will go and trim some more off so that I can run it all the way up the page. Now, to help me get these placed nice and straight and evenly, I am taking this scrap piece of white cardstock. I'm not sure what the dimensions are. It was literally just a scrap piece that was sitting on my desk. And I'm taping that down to my my cutting mat, which has got the grid on it, the measurement grid. So I'm taping that down, and then I'm going to use the grid behind as the guide for laying my pieces down. So each piece is going about 1/2 inch above the top of the piece below it. And I started working from the bottom and I'm working my way up. Those pieces that I have there that I'm pulling from on the left, they were popped down in the order that I had played around with them on the page. So I just sort of shuffled those down. And that's it, nice and quick and easy. I'm just going to trim off that edge a little bit because it was, even though I did cut my paper strips the same size, there was a little bit of a rough edge there on the right hand side. So I've just trimmed that off, and now I'm ready to come around and start playing with building the layout. Now I had put some thought into this layout, but probably not as much planning as I should have. My idea in my head was that these sort of fringed, punched out pieces would come out from underneath the photo, and the whole thing would be centered on the page vertically, horizontally. I can't think of which way it is right now. The whole thing would be centered on the page, and there would be some white space at the top and some white space at the bottom. But when I put it all together and I laid it all down, it just didn't quite look the way that I thought it would. So my next thought was to have that pattern paper that's got the multicolored hearts on it, to have that pattern paper run the length of the page, or to have it look like it was running the length of the page, like this, which is what I've got now. So I've got the heart pattern paper on the top, which is what the photo is sitting on, and then it's running all the way down and finishing down underneath all of those fringed layers. Now that works, and that works just fine. But the problem that I have when I put it together in just a moment is that the difference between the hard line of that first strip of pattern paper, to my eye, it ends up being really, really obvious. And I just don't like the way that it looks. So I am going to, first of all, stick the photo down to save on paper rather than having that piece of heart pattern paper running all the way down and hidden behind those fringed strips. I trim it down so it's just covering my photo. But I just didn't like the way that it looked. So to fix that, I have used a doily. So I've just trimmed that doily in half and added a little bit on the top and a little bit on the bottom. I did have to pull all my layers apart. And that just helps to cover up that hard edge of the pattern paper that's sitting behind the photo. So hopefully I explained that well enough. It's quite early in the morning when I'm recording this voiceover, so I don't know that my brain is fully active quite yet. So for my journaling, which you just see me bringing now, you've just seen me bring in now, I did type that up on the computer. I think I didn't do that on my typewriter, and it's on a tag, and I've already added some pieces of ribbon to the tag, and I wanted to create a little pocket behind my photo here for some hidden journaling. So this is something that I did in another recent layout, and for some reason, it's just something that's really appealing to me at the moment, particularly when I've got a little bit more to say. I don't necessarily want to clutter up my page with journaling. So adding some longer journaling onto a tag or a piece of paper or something like that that I can tuck behind the photo, for me, is a good way of getting those stories told. So to do that, as I've just been talking there, you've watched me create that pocket just by adding 3 pieces of tape around where the tag would go, and then adhering a piece of paper behind to create a little pocket which is perfectly sized for that tag. And that's now tucked behind my photo, so I'm ready to start sticking some of the other elements of this page down. So I'm starting off with the cut files, which is the Rosy Posy cut file, and I think I mentioned in my intro that my intention is to use these as large embellishments. So I had intended on having one in the top, one in one of the top corners, and then the larger one down in the bottom. Now, to make sure that I've got the placement of this one at the top right, of course I don't want to have it overlapping my tag and prevent the tag from being pulled out, so it needs to go behind the layers, but I want to make sure that I've got the placement right before I stick everything down. So what I'm actually doing here is I'm sticking the floral cut file to the larger photo and layering block first. I'm not sticking it to it. I'm placing that down first. So I'm putting the adhesive and then I'm placing the block where I think it's going to go. And then I'm going to stick this, adhere this floral cut file down to the layout first before I do anything else. And that just makes sure that it's positioned correctly. It's positioned where I want it to be positioned. And it is adhered down before I go and stick anything else on top of it. So it's not going to move or shift around. You can see I have added some foam dots to the leaves of that floral, and that's just helped to help give it some dimension on the page. But in actual fact, on this particular floral piece, I really didn't need to do it, because as you can see, those leaves or the foliage pieces are going to be hidden behind my photo anyway. I apologize for the back of my head there. It's really hard for me to get things lined up properly on the page without getting directly over the top of it to see what I'm doing. And of course, when I do that, often I end up with my head in front of the camera. So I apologize for that. Now I'm ready to stick this second floral down onto the bottom right hand side, and again I've used some foam dots on the florals to help give those a little bit of dimension and lift them off the page. And now we have come to the fun part of the layout, which is embellishing. So I tipped out everything from the ephemera pack into this little bowl here. In fact, I actually have 2 ephemera packs for this collection for some reason. So I've only tipped one of them out, but later on I will go and dive into the second one because there was a piece that I was using that I wanted to have more than one of. So that will happen a little bit later on. I'm just flicking through all of these pieces of ephemera, and I'm pulling out the ones that I think I could make work on this layout. Of course, there's lots of florals. I have a few butterflies. I've got some die cut words, some little tabs. I've pulled some of those feathers out and some foliage. The die cut piece, the little purple piece there that says Sweet Memories, that is going to become my title. And I will adhere that down just to the bottom right of my photo. I've also grabbed a couple of little tabs. One says favorite and the other one says captured. And I'm just going to stick those tabs at the top of the top left of the photo there. So my intention is to build a little cluster here up to the top left where I've already got that floral piece. Of course, I'm going to have another cluster down the bottom right, and I will make just a tiny little cluster to the bottom right of the photo as well. So I have worked in 3s for this layout, so it's kind of a visual triangle. It's not exactly a triangle shape, but I have worked in 3s just to give it some balance in my embellishing. So I'm just playing around with, I'm not sticking anything down just yet. I'm just playing around, popping pieces, trying pieces out, seeing what works. Anything that I think is not going to end up on the page, I'm putting back into the bowl. And I've got a rough idea now of where things are going to go, particularly for that top cluster. So I'm going to start adhering some things down. I've got some florals there, which I've tucked in between the layers. Again, making sure that I'm not putting anything over the top of that tag that's going to prevent it from pulling out. So that floral that I've adhered down just then, one of the leaves was kind of overlapping, and I did have some a foam dot behind it. So when I tried to pull the tag out and I saw that it didn't come out, all I did was I removed the foam dot, which means that the tag can move freely now behind that floral piece. Using some wet adhesive to tuck these little tabs in between the layers on top of my photo. And as I said, this purple die cut piece that says Sweet Memories, that's going to become my title. At this point in the creation, I still wasn't entirely sure where I wanted that to go, but I had an idea that I wanted it to be on the bottom right of the photo. I just didn't want it to be sitting there on its own, so I've grabbed a couple of floral die cut pieces. One was a half piece, which I had used the other half in the top cluster, and then I'm just digging through that bowl to find another little piece there to tuck behind. So I've just created a tiny little floral cluster behind that die cut piece, and that's enough to just give it a little bit more visual interest and to help it stand out a little bit more against the photo. I pulled that flare button out. I always pull flare buttons out, and I really struggle to get those on my layout for some reason. I love the idea of them, but in practicality, I just can never really make them work. Let me know in the comments if you've got any tips on how to bring those flare buttons into a layout, or how to incorporate them into a layout, because it's something I've got lots and lots and lots of them, and I just seem to get stuck and I can never really make them work. So I have tucked another smaller floral piece underneath the die cut word, which is my title, and that's just to help to fill out that tiny little cluster there. And now I'm playing around with this larger floral piece on the bottom. I didn't want to cover up a lot of it. I wanted to leave as much of it visible as I possibly could. So while I was having a think about what to do there, I've just grabbed a couple of their kind of polka dot tabs. One's a really soft orange and one's a soft purple. And just for a little bit of extra on either side of that photo, I've just tucked those in between the layers. And I think I have an idea now of what I want to do with this floral. So I had this thought of this picture of a butterfly sitting on top of a flower, which we know they do sometimes. So I wanted to create that effect on the flower. But before I did that, I wanted to build that layer out towards the corner a little bit more, just to balance the embellishment cluster that I've got at the top. So at the top of the page, you can see that the embellishment cluster comes all the way to the edge. So I wanted to build this one out a little bit just to balance that out. It doesn't quite reach the edge on this one, but it certainly is closer, which makes it makes it a little bit more balanced. And then I'm going to add a couple of butterflies, just adding some foam dots behind the wings there and some wet adhesive across the bodies. So this is where I pulled another one of the butterflies out of the other embellishment pack, because I wanted to have two of them that were the same colour. So I've got one little butterfly there sitting on top of the floral, one flying off it, and then one up the top. And to finish off this layer, I'm not using Nuvo drops, I'm using some of the enamel dots which came with this Bohemian Dreams collection, and I'm just going to scatter those around just to fill out a few little spaces in my clusters. So that is it for this layout. Of course, you'll find all the details that you need for the Cut to Use store for this cut file down in my description box below. So as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.